three wonderful daughters, Golda Sarah, Rivka Chasya, and Rachel Chana, for making it possible for you to be here with us today. So thank you very much. Dr. Weiss.
Thank you very, very much for that lovely introduction. I'm very, very honored to be here, not so much as a physician of the Rebbe, but as a friend to N'shei Chabad. I'm very honored to be joining you for this beautiful convocation as part of the N'shei Chabad convention. I've just had the privilege to spend a short time in the exhibits, and I wish it could have been longer. But I would tell you that just to see the exhibits alone was worth the trip from Chicago. I saw the most beautiful slide presentation from N'shei on the beauties of candlelighting, which I would urge all of you to spend time to see, and a beautiful presentation on the videotape about kashrus, and a beautiful series of panels on family purity. And there were many exhibits that I'm afraid that I couldn't see yet, but I'll tell you this alone was worth the trip. When I got the invitation to speak before you, I wasn't sure exactly what my expertise is, but I will say one thing, that I have been all my life privileged to be in contact with some extraordinary women in my family and in my schooling, and most recently here in Crown Heights. I was raised in part by a wonderful grandmother who herself was a lady of great valor. As a young child in Europe, she lost her parents and without family was brought to America as a hired household servant in a home where she served several years without salary, and with having no family in Chicago, finally was able to find herself a chassan and get married, and had two beautiful daughters. But as tragedy would have it, she lost her husband in the great influenza epidemic of 1918 and was left without a family, with two little girls, and without even mastery of any language and no reading and writing. And with her own strength and her own resources became a master weaver in one of the great clothing manufacturers, and was regarded as a real genius in her field, and raised the girls to be God-fearing women who raised very, very good families.
Dr. Weiss, we want to hear you in the back too.
Sure.
Thank you.
Her daughter, my mother, also a woman of great valor, had very few trials in life until 4 years ago, when my father underwent heart surgery. And unfortunately, during the operation, he lost his entire dominant portion of the brain. And she was suddenly transformed from a lady who could go out and do a number of projects for the community to someone who was full-time housebound and hardly was able to shed a tear. She was busy taking care of the job at hand, and showed me the kind of strength that my grandmother must have had when she was left alone in the world. At home, I have a very outstanding lady as my wife, Myra, who, as a product of the 1960s college years, was trained at secular schools such as Brandeis University, exposed to what you might call a lot of apocoursis, but was able to learn from her teachers, even in not the most formal religious setting, the value of Judaism, and gained her own foothold on Judaism through appreciation of the significance of Torah and mitzvahs as an essential part of being a Jew. And despite an initial start that wouldn't have led her on this path, came to be a real Baal Tshuva in the fullest sense by her own intellectual powers. She went on to teach at a Ivy League school, Wellesley College in Wellesley, Massachusetts, where Judaism was almost an off-limits word. She helped to develop for the Jewish student body, made up of girls, a very important institution that included Shabbos and kashrus for several girls, and was recognized as really the campus Jew in a campus that was really not very oriented towards Judaism. I'm also surrounded by three outstanding little daughters who, although they are very young, have shown great strength as Jewish women in their short spans. My oldest daughter, Golda Sarah, who's now 9 years old, has written such beautiful commentaries on the parshios she studies that it puts her daddy almost to shame. She does a lot of teaching to her daddy. And my second daughter, little Rivka Chasya, is a genius in her own right, doing all kinds of things from electronic projects to computer wizardry, and she's only 6 years old. And my youngest daughter looks like she's going to be very outstanding too, thank God, little Rachel Chana, who came to us through a special bracha of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And I may have a time to tell you a little bit more about the Rebbe's special wish to us. In addition to my immediate family, where there are many outstanding women, I have been very privileged to have been trained by outstanding women. My years in Cheder, at a school called N'shei Chabad in Chicago, had Rebbitzin Chava Schusterman, Rabbi Herschel Schusterman's wife, who I can tell you is really one of the most outstanding people you can meet in this world. And she to me is like a second mother. My wife's hometown, Worcester, Massachusetts, has in it a most outstanding lady, Rebbitzin Rachel Fogelman, who you may have met here at many of the meetings. And I can assure you that Rebbitzin Fogelman is my mother-in-law away from home. And in recent years, I've come to meet a very outstanding member of our community, Rebbitzin Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe Shlita's wife, who I can tell you, although she is a private person, has such great depth and magnitude that many times I'm wondering whether she's the doctor caring for me or I'm the doctor caring for her and her husband. I must say regarding the Rebbitzin that there have been many, many experiences which illustrate this point, some of which are a little private. They deal with medical matters, but I quite often keep in touch with the Rebbitzin by telephone on a regular basis to keep track of the goings-on here at Crown Heights. Thank God the calls are more social than medical, but I can tell you that the Rebbitzin has an uncanny ability to listen at the other end of a telephone, and I use a Sprint phone, so the connection is always bad, and yet despite the fuzz and the haze on the line, the Rebbitzin is able to perceive what's behind the words. And she has come up with some remarkable questions about what really is going on in my mind or what's happening with my patients in Chicago. Her ability to perceive the word by way of the electronic communication is reminiscent of a beautiful sikha that the Lubavitcher Rebbe once presented at this time of the year before Shavuos, when he described the pasuk, the arguments about the pasuk that the Jewish people of Mount Sinai heard the lightning and heard the thunder and saw the lightning. And the Rebbe emphasized the importance of the reversal of these sensory processes as part of the increased miracle of the revelation at Mount Sinai. One of the points he made is that there's a very, very strong difference between seeing and hearing. As he said in his sikha, that when you have seen something as a witness to some event, you can't be moved that it didn't happen. If you're a witness to a robbery, you saw the burglar, and you couldn't be told that it didn't happen. On the other hand, when you hear something, it's much more spiritual and ethereal. It could be a true report, it could be a false report. You may reject it, you may accept it, but the fact is that hearing something doesn't make the impact that seeing does. I know for one that I have trouble communicating with someone by telephone because I can't see what's on their face. I can't wait till they get the telephones that transmit with the TV because I cannot tell what the person really is saying unless I see what the eyes are saying, what the mouth is really saying around the corners. But Rebbitzin Schneerson has been able to perceive things on the telephone. Just this last winter, for example, she sensed that something must be wrong in our household during a cold wave in Chicago, and she asked me, is everything okay in your household? And as luck would have it, that night, I didn't want to bother her with this, but our furnace had broken down, and it was very cold in the house, and she had picked it up right away by talking on the telephone. My wife and children who have met the Rebbitzin at her house commented to me that when she meets Rebbitzin Schneerson, she can't help but see a remarkable resemblance between the Rebbitzin's profound and wise countenance and that of her great-great-great-grandfather, the Alter Rebbe. Because if you have ever looked at the beautiful picture of the Alter Rebbe, I think that someone has once done by drawing the words of Tanya, and if you were to meet the Rebbitzin face to face, you would say that there is a profound similarity in what's expressed both in the face physically and spiritually, so that there's certainly been a very direct line of descendants that you can see. I'm also impressed by how caring the Rebbitzin is for her husband. I'm sure we all are very caring for the members of our family, but you have to feel the Rebbitzins' pulse practically to know how careful she is that things are going well for the Rebbe. We're all aware of how hard the Rebbe works, and the Rebbitzin takes so seriously his hours. And in fact, in recent months, because of the Rebbitzin's confinement, because of an injury, the Rebbe has been coming home a little bit earlier. And I can't tell you what good medicine this is for her wife, who sees her husband having a little more time to do his studies in a degree of peace and quiet that can't be obtained in the Merkaz. Sometimes the Rebbitzin cares for my own problems when I have a very heavy schedule in Chicago. And I can tell you sometimes it is very hard to be a doctor. And the Rebbitzin has been such a good doctor to me that it's very reminiscent of what happened to me this past week in Chicago. I've just gone through 1 month of the hardest period I think I can ever remember in my own patients back home. And on Tuesday, I was dragging around the hospital at 11 p.m. trying to finish rounds, realizing that they really wouldn't be finished till 2 or 3. And I decided I would see my oldest patient first. And it happens to be a very dear man in the Chicago circles of Lubavitch, Rabbi Moshe Sheyevitz. And he was in the hospital for a lung problem, waiting for me patiently. He saw me drag in at 11, and although he himself was having high fevers and had a very rough diagnosis, was not feeling well at all, insisted that I felt worse than he did, although I'm sure it wasn't true. He sat me down, he made me some tea, he gave me his egg matzahs, he insisted that I wash for bread, say hamotzi, and we sat for 15 minutes, which really restored my soul. And I told Mr. Shavitz that only one other person has ever taken care of me this way, and it is Rebbitzin Schneerson. I told Rebbitzin Schneerson the story, and she said that she knows of Mr. Shavitz through her father of blessed memory, who used to talk about his kindness even as a younger man. I wanted to thank the N'shei Chabad for a dear favor done years ago to me when the Neshek branch published a beautiful book called The Candle of My Own, and to my surprise was an inscription in the front page in my honor. And I will tell you that this book has gone a very long way in Chicago. I have distributed the large number of copies that Neshek provided me to selected patients who have either been teachers or people from other cities. And on getting a present like this, they bring it to their cities or bring it to their schools. And I'll tell you that it has a profound impact on spreading the ideas represented in the candle lighting program of Neshek. Many people always ask me what it is that I have to tell them about the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin, and I often have to shun the question because it's very, very private sometimes. Medical matters are confidential between a patient and his doctor. And furthermore, sometimes I'm sure the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin want to keep matters rather quiet about themselves because by nature they are very, very humble and don't seek much attention on these matters, although they can't escape but being watched. But one of the questions that comes up very often is what is the medical program that we've given the Rebbe to permit a real recovery, thank God, over the last several years, so that the Rebbe has been a strong patient. And I think that much has to do with the Rebbe's wisdom in understanding of what the doctor's advice is, and certainly in addition to God's blessings for a good recovery. Both the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin are particularly careful about matters concerning diet, which has been a very important part of the Rebbe's therapy. And I thought because this is a group that has profound influence on each and every family in Lubavitch, that a dietary recommendation that I gave the Rebbe many years ago and have reiterated is not really private to the Rebbe. I have given this type of recommendation to my own family, and I've given it to many of the people I've seen in Chicago. And I think if I shared it with you, many of you are homemakers, we could actually do a lot of good with some of these recommendations and ideas in the hope that with God's help this will reduce some of the chances for artery disease that you have, arteriosclerosis that you read about, and some other degenerative diseases that we might prevent with dietary measures. I like very much the slideshow of kashrus that I just saw out in the lobby, and I would urge you to see this. And if I were to make my own slideshow, I would say start with the kashrus and then add these additional recommendations, which of course are not quite as important as kashrus, but have a lot to do with pikuach nefesh. I think through some of these recommendations, I'm not being facetious, but it might be possible to give the wish, this 100 stansik, with the fullest heart, to say that I'm going to give the wish bis 120 and know that it actually could come true. The four ideas that I presented to the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin, which I will share with you and are not private to them, are the following. One is that more and more dietary research has emphasized the concept of eating evenly spaced portions, so that the idea of a very large meal at the end of a workday is less logical, whereas the idea of eating several evenly spaced meals, or maybe even a little more heavily weighted before the workday begins, is more logical. A number of experiments done in my own home state in the agricultural colleges have shown that many animals on farms do much better when fed in small frequent portions, even though their inclination may be not to eat that way. And in fact, it's now a standard way of raising livestock in Illinois to deliver machinery that delivers the food in several small portions. What this does for the body, and I hope also the soul, because as the Rebbe once told me that a hole in the guf causes a very big hole in the nefesh, that it makes much less of a load on several systems in the body that have limited capacities. I'm sure you all know that the pancreas produces insulin, and there's a limited capacity to release insulin. This is how people become diabetic, and it may be surprising to hear that even youngsters and young adults can behave transiently like diabetics when given sudden loads of food too rapidly, because there's only a limited capacity for the pancreas to produce insulin, which is the hormone that counters things like sugar. There's a limited capacity to transport fats and oils in the bloodstream, and all these things can show up very clearly on simple experiments. I can tell you that in my office, I many times see executives who have had expense account lunches, and they come in for their physicals, and I draw the blood, and lo and behold, the blood is white and red, if you can believe that, because the white part are fat droplets that had nowhere to go in the bloodstream. There was a limited capacity to handle that much fat at one meal. And what happens, unfortunately, is it's deposited on the wall of arteries. The second recommendation that I presented to the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin was to limit greatly the intake of all fats and oils. And this includes things like nuts and peanut butter and skin of the chicken, dark meat of the chicken as opposed to white meat, fleishik soups, because even if you skin your soups till you're blue in the face, a lot of the protein in the soup emulsifies the fat. 2/3 of the fat rises and 1/3 stays in a way that you can't separate it. It looks like it's watery. And the outcome of such a restriction might be very well to reduce the chance of fats and oils depositing in the walls of arteries. In our own household, we have a very low meat bill, comparable to when we were first married in the early 70s, because we just very seldom buy red meat. On Shabbos, it's about the only time of the week when we're fleishik, we have white meat, and even then with the skin off and no soups made with the meat. Our cholent is usually a vegetable type of cholent with beans and with potatoes, but not any meat fat, so that we are not given extra loads of fat that the body isn't always prepared to handle. In particular, I would emphasize that high cholesterol fats, such as egg yolk, be eliminated as much as possible. Many foods are made with egg yolk, so it's very hard to know that a slice of cake has 1.5 times as much cholesterol as I would allow myself to eat in a whole day. Egg yolks themselves, while the egg industry says they're very good, have been shown to cause arteriosclerosis in animals. In fact, the original experiments done in animals to show how arteriosclerosis can form was done with egg yolks. We use a lot of eggs at our house, but we retain the whites only. Likewise, I know that the Rebbitzin at home is trying her best to reduce the intake of cholesterol for the purpose of restricting arteriosclerosis. The third recommendation that I emphasized was the limitation of all rapidly absorbable sugary foods. For example, sugary soda pop, having too much fruit at one sitting because fruit has a natural sugar, fructose, or things that are naturally very sugary like Jell-O, or sweet desserts like bakery items that have a lot of sugar. The reason for this restriction, as I said before, is that there is a limit to how much the body can handle sugar at one time. Everyone in this room, even the youngest, can behave like a diabetic if given too much sugar at one time. It's much better to have whole grain starches, which also become sugar, but much more slowly. They require digestion by the body, so that in effect it's released very slowly. And I see that in the Schneerson household, when I visit, they're using more whole grain products, and they're trying to get their local bakery to do likewise, although it's sometimes like moving a mountain. And the last recommendation is the general avoidance of salty foods. For example, canned fish, even tuna fish that's said to be packed in water can be very salty, as well as obviously salty foods like pickled foods and smoked foods and cured meats and delicatessen meats and sandwich meats. These are all, and many cheeses, these are all foods that have a lot of salt. And the reason for this is that if the population were to follow this recommendation, we would see less high blood pressure, less swelling in the feet at the end of a day, and probably overall protection of the arteries of the body. Some recommendations that I have not given the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin, considering their age, is the recommendation to younger people to take plenty of calcium in the form of dairy products, particularly low-fat dairy products. I see that they now have a low-fat yogurt on the market now. I just had a little bit of that this morning from one of the families here. And there's, I hope, a low-fat Chalav Yisrael milk available. But these are foods that should be regularly taken in all households, particularly by the younger members so they can build up the calcium. I didn't mean to make this a medical convention, but I'll tell you that in the last 2 or 3 minutes we have covered more material appropriate to preventing heart disease than I have seen presented in all the years that I've gone to the American College of Cardiology and chased around the world to go to the American Heart Association and spent thousands of dollars to hear what's being said. I don't think I heard so much said about preventing heart disease and artery disease as we may have discussed just now at the N'shei Chabad convention. And I think that since I'm a physician being invited to talk to this prestigious group, and this group has such influence on the health of their families in this community and around the world, I hope that some of these recommendations will actually be taken back home and put to good use. Because I know that our dear Rebbe has taken this advice to heart, and I'm sure that this would be very, very good advice, particularly for younger people, because why wait till you have any artery problems? Why not just prevent them? I want to conclude by saying that in every way we feel the effect of N'shei Chabad in Chicago. In many ways. I see it with this book, A Candle of My Own. We have active candle lighting programs at the hospital where I attend, and I'm sure this is largely due to the influence of N'shei Chabad. And my wife, who is an active member in the N'shei Chabad in Chicago, tells me all the many, many good projects. I wish you only Hatzlacha in all the various projects, that you should disseminate this around the world, be great emissaries of our dear Rebbe Shlita, and greet the coming month of Sivan, the month of Matan Torah, a time of giving of Torah in the past and certainly in the present. We should all have a very, very freilich and good Yom Tov. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weiss. We've heard things today that we've never heard before, and I think our meal today has some nutritional value. So relax, enjoy each other, enjoy the company, and we'll continue our program in a short while.